right, guys. Welcome back to the Way podcast. This week, I have a brand new guest. He is one of the co hosts of the Different Boats, Same Storm podcast, which has, I think, 25 episodes now and is very interesting. A lot of cool conversations. And today I have the co host, Atharv Agrawal. And yeah, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks a lot, Sachin. Quite a pleasure to be here on this rather exciting podcast. My name is Atharv. I am a third year now at Victoria College at the University of Toronto, studying economics, data analytics, and peace, conflict, and justice. Uh, there are many more things that I can dive deep into, and you will see this in the conversation. But as Sachin mentioned, I do run a podcast. I've been doing so for nearly 2 years now. It's called Different Boat, Same Storm. And it's a video podcast that's aimed at kindling empathy amidst this global pandemic, where we engage in insightful and thought-provoking conversations with people from all walks of life. And I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. I guess we could start off about I guess we could talk about, like how you got into podcasting, what drew you to it.
For sure. Yeah. Well, so the idea for this sort of blossomed at right when we were in the throes of the pandemic early on, March 2020, when I was my first year at the U of T at the time was abruptly just disrupted by
Yeah.
this pandemic. And we were all, being an international student at the U of T, I was finally exposed for the first time in this capacity, at least, to such a diverse range and variety of people with different experiences and perspectives. And we'd formed this community of sorts, which was very intimate at U of T. And then suddenly, within the blink of an eye, everybody was just scattered all throughout the world, back in their home, stranded in Toronto, and everything in between. And as I was just suddenly in this limbo, I managed to get on the last flight back home to Mumbai, which is where I'm from, and all my friends were in all these different places. I just, even though I had that connection, I felt really disconnected with the world around me, apart from these outlets that I had. And even within, from the limited information that I did have, I could see that our experiences were so different despite this global commonality that we were all facing. And more so, when you think about learning more about the world, the first instinct is, oh, let's tune into the news because that's kind of what it's meant to do. But every time I did that, all I heard, or we all heard, was data, numbers, statistics just thrown at us, a barrage of information just constantly in our direction from all directions. But there were no stories. And in my mind, this is a public health crisis, yes. This is a geopolitical crisis, yes. It is an economic crisis, very much so. A public health crisis, yes. But at its core, more than anything else and above everything else, it is a humanitarian crisis. It's real people going through this very real problem that most of us have never faced or thought we would face in our lives, and then trying to adapt to it in very real ways. There are no hypotheticals here. There are no 9 lives or an unlimited cash reserve or fantastical worlds that we can build for ourselves. This is happening in the real world around us every single moment. Very real constraints. And yet we were able to adapt because that's part of who we are as humans. We adapt and we evolve to our dynamic surroundings. And I think all of us, when we started the podcast, we just wanted to capture that, not in a morbid way, because I think we had our fair share of that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
everybody who's listening to this can testify to that. We had our fair share of morbidity when it came to the pandemic, but we wanted to truly understand what is it that got people still going in these times? What brought them joy? How had they changed the way that they live their lives fundamentally and yet still make that peace with it? Because we felt that only when we did that, only when we could truly realize that we're all going through this in our own ways, but still going through it in some capacity, could we truly, truly empathize with one another and feel more connected and embedded in the world around us. And that's really what came down to making this podcast, and hence the name too. Different boat, same storm. We're all on different boats, but yet we're all going through the same storm, and the only way out of the storm is together.
Well said. Yeah, like your podcast is so interesting because it's kind of what we all kind of needed during that time, right? Amongst all these statistics, this many people have died. It's this, this easy to this percentage of people contract it or whatever. All these statistics that are thrown at us, that were thrown at us daily, kind of made us forget about us, right? The people around us, right? And yeah, I mean the name is perfect. Different boat, same storm. Just really encapsulates that we're all in this together. And then if there's one, I don't know if it's a silver lining, but it's one outcome of this pandemic that has provided some benefit is self-reflection, right? During this time, so much time to ourselves. I don't think we've had this much time to ourselves, not being connected with people in I don't know how many years, right? And it really helps people. Well, at least I think most people tried. They tried to reflect on themselves and see what really matters, right? And a lot of people, they took up new passions. For example, like I started cooking a lot. Now I probably cook every meal of the day, right? And I took the pandemic as a step to pursue my music harder, more passionately, and also to make this podcast too. It's just I was lucky enough not to be personally affected by this pandemic as much as other people may have been, right? We are all mentally affected by it, not being able to see people in person for so long. But I'm thankful I wasn't, in a horrible health. I wasn't in horrible health or in a situation where I was, at risk of contracting it or people I cared about contracting it. Just I was just fortunate, fortunate to be in the situation I am, and that it helped me reflect on myself, just to be grateful for what you got and appreciate those around you, right?
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what it was. That I think we need. It's painfully ironic that it took the world to come to a grinding halt for us to realize this, but I think we all have, in our own regards, in our own capacities, realize that people are our greatest assets, and if anything, our only assets.
Mm-hmm.
And the I think it provided an opportunity for self-reflection and introspection. The onus is still on us to take it and run with it. And the ones who did are the ones who I think have benefited from this time in ways that are invaluable. And at the same time, it can't be said that everybody had the same opportunity to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, as you were talking about as well, there is privilege attached to be able to do these things. And I think just recognizing that privilege in itself, cognizance of where you stand and who you're standing upon is is very important because it provides humility, it instills humility, and it also, in my mind, energizes you to use and harness the resources and capabilities and opportunities that you have for the better, for the better, of affecting and reaching people far beyond your personal reach, or at least them, if not more.
Yeah. Um, and it's something that a lot of people tend to forget. You know, living in um, living in Canada or another uh, more developed country in the compared to other parts of the world. I mean, if you make I can't remember what the statistic was, but it's like if you make more than 50 or is it 80,000 USD, you're like in the top 1% of the world or something, like some insane number, right? And that really puts everyone talks about the one percenters and all that, but if you think about it, you're also in a 1% of the world, right? There's
Yeah.
99% of the rest of the world that is also that is struggling much more financially, than you
Hmm.
may be. Um, yeah, and it's important to recognize that. And one thing I credit I wouldn't say I have an amazing ability. We all are improving, but ability to recognize, self reflect. I credit that to one, my parents. They were they raised me to always appreciate because they didn't have much and they gave me as much as they could. They worked hard to give me a good life, and also to my martial arts training. Um, and I talk about this a lot because it's such an important part of my life, and it's 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 kind of metaphor for life, martial arts, but in a very simple context, right? Like the context of a fight is one of the most simple interactions between two people that one person could have, right? And in that interaction, going through that sort of process, you really are humbled, right? It's like when you first start anything. That's why it's important, always be trying to improve yourself, and that's what martial arts instilled in me. Always try to improve, be have the learner's mind. I think that's a saying in karate. It's used quite often. I forget the actual Japanese translation, but having a learner's mind always is one of the main principles of karate, and I think you can apply that to anything in life. You learn so much about yourself through other experiences, right? Um, and I think people should try their best to be open. And I think that's what we saw during this pandemic: people learning, taking the opportunity to learn after they kind of been humbled in a sense, right? You can't, you're restricted to the confines of your home, some to the confines of their room, and you know they have to figure out something to do, and they're like, oh, I have nothing else to do. I might as well do this. I have. It's kind of like almost humbled you in a way. You have no options, right? Your options are so much simpler.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Well, that's exactly true. And at the same time, I think human ingenuity means that your options are boundless even then. It's just your constraints are different. So
mm,
your range of options is different, but the options are still endless. And I think the fact that so many people did such different things is testament to that. So it's really just a matter of truly asking within what exactly it is that you want to gain from the time and just run with it.
yeah,
Just run with it. Just the willingness to want to channel that energy towards something that you truly find joy in is, I think, the biggest step, because it's very easy to just while that energy away and nobody's going to stop you. And by all means, it is a tough time, so you're allowed to do that. It's just a matter of striking that balance and recognizing that you live through life not knowing what exactly is going to be, what exactly is going to make history, you know. We, in our lifespan, we'd be lucky if one thing that happens in our life is going to make history, because that's just how history works. It's always judged, its importance is always judged retrospectively. But we're in this unique space right now where we know that this is going to be talked about. This, we're living through something that is going to be history. Regardless of who says it, it's going to be history. Which is why how we act now is how we're going to be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's the only way we're going to be talked about, but this will make the feature. So, for what it's worth, this is your onus to stamp your way into the sands of time. It's ephemeral, yes, but I think just understanding the gravitas of the situation and putting that into perspective is very important, because it's this also just ties into the whole narrative of you're not judged on when you're at your best and you have everything working for you and then you show up, because anybody can do that. If you have everything lined up for you in your favor and you show up and you do something, that's great, but it's not nearly as impressive as when you have all these constraints put on you, you're beaten against the wall, and yet you decide to show up to the best of your capabilities. I think that speaks about you in volumes far more than the ideal situation. So I don't think people should be so much concerned about how they end up doing the results. We can't possibly be focused on the results now or ever, but even especially now. Just the simple act of doing itself puts you in that 1%, so to say, because most people won't. A lot of people can't. So the ones who can should be the ones who do it.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Yeah, it's just that first step, people, sometimes we focus too much on results versus the actual process, like a lot of people say, it's about the journey, not the destination. And I find that's true with everything in life. Um, I mean, yeah, going on a long plane ride to, a nice warm climate might not seem like the journey is the most important part, but, that's just one case. You can look at, for example, you work on a project with somebody that you're really passionate about, for example, let's just say you make a company for sustainability and you work with a group that's really passionate about it and you enjoy their company. And let's just say you work super hard and you don't achieve what you want to achieve. You didn't save this much, this many trees or whatever, you didn't meet whatever initial goal, but you can't let that deter you from trying again, right? It's always about, people say not to dwell, and it's true, because what's the point? It's, you talk about economics, this idea of sunk cost, right? And if it's done, it's done. If you can't recover it, why worry about it? And, it's one of the hardest things to apply in your real life, right? Because this idea of, I have to get, it's like the idea of getting your money's worth, essentially. And, I think we shouldn't focus too much on what we've what happened in the past. We should obviously we should learn. We should learn from what we've done and what didn't work, right? That's how we move forward. But we need to move forward as well. We can't just keep on talking about what we got wrong. And even if you're in a situation like I was describing, it's almost more important. The journey of getting through that project is more important than the actual result of it. Sometimes, I can think of countless times where, in high school, I was involved in drama, quite a lot, dramatic arts, and there was a student play written by one of our peers. We acted in it, we performed it, we moved on from our school to regionals. We didn't move on from there, but it's one of the best moments of my life. Just the relationship you build with people through going through something, right? And it's something that's the journey of going through that was more important than actually making it to internationals or whatever it was. I mean, it would have been nice. It's a bonus, but really it's about building a relationship with the people around you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have swum competitively for nearly all my life now, and I still continue swimming here at U of T on the masters team. And something that my coach or one of my mentors back home at the pool always said is that if you cannot enjoy spending 15 to 30 hours that you spend in the pool every single week for the entire year training, no medal or trophy or win could ever fill that void and motivate you enough to continue doing this. If you do not enjoy the grueling training, no amount of wins, as big or as small as it might be, could compensate for it. Because if you can't find joy in the process, in the way, as is the name of the podcast, then you won't enjoy the finish line, because you'll get there and all you see is fog ahead of you because you haven't even thought about what comes after, and you haven't been paying attention or taking interest in what you were going through to get to the finish line. So it's foggy behind as well, and there's just a lack of vision. But if you're focusing on the process, and there is no finish line, everything is just a milestone from where you can move onwards and upwards. And the milestone tells you how far you've come, what it took to get there, and what the possibilities are from here on. Because there isn't a finish line. I think an author that I really, really like is Simon Sinek. You probably have heard of him. One thing that he really, really likes to say is, we are humans by definition. We are mortal. There is an end to life, but our legacy can stay in forever. But if we approach life and everything that we do and the legacy we leave behind, life is it's an infinite game. It existed before we came here. It's happening as we speak, whether we choose to engage or not, and it's going to exist after. Hopefully, if climate change doesn't ruin us, which will be self-inflicted though. But regardless, life still remains after. We are just inserting ourselves for the briefest moment of time into the stream. But if we fail to recognize that even if we're there for the shortest moment, our additions could be there forever. What we bring to the table, what we add to the stream could be there forever. If we treat it like a finite game instead of it being an infinite stream, then our incentives are skewed, and there is no winning or losing in an infinite game. but there is a winning and losing in a finite game. If you're playing the infinite game, you don't care about winning or losing. You just care about playing it and being in it and immersing yourself in it, because that's all that matters. But if you think of it as a finite game, then there are winners and losers, and by definition, we are finite, so we will end up losing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the kind of life I would like to live, at least.
Yeah, and this idea of there always being winners and losers, I feel like that's one thing that holds us back as humans, is this idea of there has to be a winner. There has to be a winner, there has to be a loser. And having winners and having losers in certain contexts is important, right? You have to have a winner of a football game, right? You have to have a winner of a race. But in life, isn't always you have to step on the heads of those below you to get to the top. You can bring people up with you, uplift everyone together, rather than only I can win. Only I can succeed in this game of life. And it's obviously it's easier said than done, adopting this kind of very, I say, general kind of idea to life in all facets, right? It's kind of difficult for the government to think in this way when running a country, but I think if we can always remember that we're all one, we are all one people, we have our differences, and that's what makes us beautiful as a people. Um, as long as we remember those differences and respect them, and we bring everyone up together, then we can really truly succeed. I mean, you look at, I don't know if there's a statistic about this, but think people, just an anecdotal experience, people who step on others to get to the top, how long do they last? And I'm not necessarily saying if you bring everyone up, you'll last much longer than someone who didn't, but at least you'll enjoy, I feel like you'll enjoy the time that you spend at that level of increased whatever it is, happiness, financial freedom, more than being there alone, right? And it's something that I found interesting in one of the courses I took this year, and it was an organizational behavior introduction kind of course. And then the first assignment we had was to listen to this podcast about why millionaires are some of the saddest people. And it was so interesting to hear. I think it was 76,000, a past 76,000 annual income. They said the increase of happiness in the average person is no longer increased by monetary means. And I mean, it is one study, but we can, just applying that to life, you can see like these examples of this all the time, right? Millionaires, there's so many stories of millionaires with failed marriages, tough to make friends, fake friends, people trying to take their money. Only it's just so many problems that come with it, and everyone has their own issues, right? Everyone thinks more money, more happy, but really it's more money, more problems, right? And after a certain point, once your basic needs are met, and maybe it's not 76,000 here in Canada, but even so, whatever, if you can put food on the table, be able to buy a few nice things every once in a while, and not worry about that kind of stuff, then there's a very small increase in terms of happiness based on monetary means. And I find that so interesting, because this is kind of the idea of our society, really. It's perpetuated in media that more money will lead to a better life. Yeah, to a certain extent, but what happens after you meet those needs that you need, like those needs that are required for you to survive in society? What happens
Mm,
after?
yeah. Well, life is too beautiful for it to not have more meaning than just gaining more money. And it might be a bit too naive for me to say anything about that right now because A, I'm privileged enough to be in a position to not have to think about that. And B, I am not in a position where I could speak about this from personal experience. But I think regardless of that, life is too beautiful for it to not have more meaning than just that. There are things that bring us joy that are not that. And it is a means to an end, but it can't be the end itself because it's not going to fill the void that we're seeking to fill with it. Which is why it's so important to center our lives around what we value and things that truly make us happy. Not stepping stones, uh, but having that vision to recognize what is it that makes us happy. And maybe money is the way to get to that. And for that, by all means,
Mm-hmm.
pursue that because that will bring you joy. But I fail to believe that it is just money. I think just the foolishly optimistic person that I am, there has to be more to it than just that. But hey, I'm discovering it myself. We'll
Who
see where
knows, right?
that leads all of us.
Yeah. Uh, how do you? I mean, we're only a year apart in school,
Mm-hmm.
and university. How's
Mm-hmm.
your experience? This you're 3 years in. Well, not 3 years in, but you're in your third
Mm-hmm.
year. But
Yeah.
how's your experience in university been? Um, Especially, you didn't. Did you go to school here in Canada beforehand, or did you live in Mumbai before as well?
No, I've lived in Mumbai basically all my life. Funnily enough, had not ever been to Canada, let alone Toronto or U of T, before I showed up here. The night before orientation, I still vividly remember I showed up to Victoria College at 10:30 or 11 in the night, and it was the first time I was actually seeing it. I
Mm-hmm.
had only ever seen it on YouTube before. So I was very much shooting in the dark, but just given the circumstances, I knew that I was coming here regardless. So it was more so just a situation where I would get here and figure it out
Yeah.
because I was coming here anyway. So very different part of the world. And I had been to the States before, and specifically, the Eastern Seaboard. So I guess culturally about as similar to Toronto as could get. But that was different because I'd gone there as a tourist. But living has been very different in its own regards, and in the best of ways too. So very different experience living in this space, especially at a place as diverse as U of T. As I was, I think, as I was saying earlier, just the fact that I can pull out a map and point in any general direction
Mm-hmm.
and know that I have at least meaningfully interacted or engaged with somebody from there is not something I could possibly say before I got here. And that's despite coming from a city as cosmopolitan as Mumbai. So my time here has been a fairy tale, really. The resources and opportunities that I've had the privilege of being exposed to, the people that I've had the immense pleasure of engaging with and learning from, and just being here and soaking it all in. And I did not expect coming in that I would have gone through this time, this experience in such with a pandemic thrown in as well. Even without a
Yeah.
pandemic, it would have been a surreal experience. But I think adding to that has just given me a perspective much that is worldly in ways that I've never imagined it to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
How about you? How has it been for you, given that you've been in Toronto for a while now? Maybe you were born here and now
yeah.
you're in your second year after having done the first year in the pandemic and now at home with the second year going along and things starting to come back up now.
Yeah, so I grew up, well, I was born here and
Hmm.
I was born in Mississauga. I didn't grow up in
Hmm.
Toronto though. I grew up I grew up in Brampton.
Hmm.
That's my hometown. I live in Mississauga now. Came here for high school. Um, and coming to U of T is just, my parents went to U of T, and I always wanted to go to this school. Wanted to go into business since beginning of high school, and I was like, I got accepted to here. That was my number one choice, and I was like, this is great. I'm like, I don't have to live downtown, thankfully. I live close enough. Like it's an hour commute, maybe up to an hour commute, but it's, to save, to save that money, it's definitely worth it. But yeah, like coming to U of T, especially in my program, the Rotman Commerce program, I mean, thankfully in Canada, there's a lot of different, many of where it's a big immigrant culture here. I mean, it's just like growing up in Brampton was very interesting because it was mostly South Asian, maybe 80. I don't even know. At least the schools I went to was probably 80% South Asian. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. Mostly from the north, northern India, northern India and Pakistan. And yeah, as a Punjabi person, it was good. I think that was my parents' goal, was because they never grew up around people who look like them. My dad came here when he was 2. My mom was born here. My mom grew up around East York, moved to Mississauga. My dad was in Etobicoke, Rexdale, and there was no one that looked like them. And back then, people weren't as accepting as we all know, and no, they had to go through a lot of abuse, um, especially as my dad wore he up until the age of 14 he wore a butka, so obviously not something very common to see in that time. So yeah, and it's something very, when my grandfather came here in the 70s, my dad's
Hmm.
father, he came here in 72, and our last name actually used to be Mor,
Hmm.
but when he came here he changed the last name
Hmm.
to Marwar. But I think there's a story that he misspelt it. It was supposed to be Mayar, like the kingdom,
Hmm.
the
Right.
ancient kingdom, but he misspelt it because he didn't really know English too well back then.
Right.
And so we were the Marwars. So, so
That's
yeah,
funny.
that was our new, almost, it was kind of I interviewed my grandfather for a project in grade 9.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I just asked him about, why he said he always wanted to leave. Growing up in the village, working in the fields, he's like, I don't want to live this life. He was a hard worker, but he didn't want to be stuck in this village for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And, he saved up money, worked really hard to get to the ability, because, thinking about leaving, like we didn't have money when my grandfather didn't have money when he came here, but to leave
Yeah.
the country at that time you had to have some
Yeah.
income, you had to have like a
Yeah.
decent amount, right?
Yeah.
And he saw the opportunity and he took it, and as many people back then, they're like, oh, we're just going to come here for a little bit, then we're going to come back. That never happened. It's like easier said than done by many
Yeah.
people. Basically all of my dad's uncles, they all said that too,
Mm.
and then they all are here. And
Hmm.
then it was just a crazy story of them growing up, just especially during the 80s. Wasn't a great time
Yeah.
for the Sikhs in India.
Yeah.
And just some crazy like people they knew involved, and just especially my uncles were just really young, and they come to a new country. They come from a village to Canada, and kind of just went a little crazy. Just
Mm,
drinking, partying, all that kind of stuff. My grandfather was trying to hold down the fort essentially. With
mm,
there's like so many people. It's a 1,500 square foot house with like 9 people,
yeah.
maybe 10. Um, and it was just crazy times for my dad. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he would come in and there'd be some guy he didn't know on the couch with his, and it turns out they'll be like involved in the Khalistani movement back in India, and they smuggled him in
Mm.
from like he just didn't know
Wow.
he was a kid. It was a lot of crazy stuff. I don't know how much I want to reveal, but just some crazy stories back then. Like
Mm-hmm.
my uncles knew a lot of different people. It was just a crazy time back then, and
Mm-hmm.
it's something, as they grew older, everyone worked hard. We got into the gas station business. I think I talked about this on one of my other episodes about entrepreneurship with my friend Ethan Sanchez. But you know he got into the gas station business in the 80s, ran the gas station by himself for a while after driving taxi for like I don't know how many years, and then eventually started picking up steam. People started working there, started to make a decent living. Then ups and downs, the market just crashed and it went back up, and now he's in a we're in a great position. And same thing for my mom. Like it's a really interesting story how my mom's grandfather, so my nonna, how he came here. um he didn't come during that when Pierre Trudeau let in that whole load of immigrants. He just it was before that. He came in
Mm-hmm.
'68, I think.
Oh wow.
So he came. So he was living in Delhi at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and he was living. He lived there all his life. He's from the city, and he knew some guy who worked at the Indian no, not the Indian embassy, the I can't remember what embassy, but it was for a North American country. I can't remember which one, but he was saying that he could get him to Canada. He could bring him to Canada. And he at first, which is hilarious, he said, "No, I don't want to go. Why would I leave this? Why would I leave? I have, a good life here. This is my city, been here, my family's been here forever." And then he's like, "No, you should come." It's like he gave him the whole pitch. And then he ended up coming along with him, and he came here. He gave him the opportunity to come here in '68, and then he never went back. He's never been back to India in I don't know 50 plus years.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean
Mm,
he wanted to go back every once for a few times, but
mm,
he feels like there's no like why would I go back to there? Things change, and my grandmother came there. It's such a interesting story. The immigrant, you know, uh, the immigrant story is something that's so common amongst people here in Canada. We
mm,
come, people come seeking a better life, more opportunity. I mean, I feel like I've heard this said. I don't know. You probably know more than I do, but in India, it's like you have the opportunity to make money, but it's it's not the same as it is in Canada. Like it's kind of like if you're stuck in a position, it's very difficult to change um, where you are generationally. You probably know. I don't know what your perspective is on that, but I mean one of the reasons why I mean my all my grandparents came here was that kind
mm-hmm.
of idea. Um, I mean, as someone who's lived in India for most of their life,
Yeah.
um, what would you have to say about that? Is it still?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think social mobility and economic mobility are not the same, is what I will say.
Mm-hmm.
And your ability, the potential for economic mobility is directly correlated with your social status. And
Mm-hmm.
given how rigid they can be sometimes, unfortunately, in Indian societies, that's probably what limits people the most. Because, and I would say that a lot of those arguments can, and in my time that I've spent here in North America, in Canada and the US, I think I've seen that a lot more here than I thought it would be. In that this notion of meritocracy is by definition flawed, just because the way you merit is used as a metric, uh, just to see potential of social mobility. But the way we measure metric is so inherently dictated by other factors that enable some people and amputate others disproportionately. Exists in both societies. I think in India, it's given the history of the country and what it was going through. It just started at a benchmark significantly lower and had constraints far more significant than we're faced here. Some might argue that we face those constraints there because of the fact that countries like these didn't have to, and we faced them at their expense. But that's a whole
Yeah,
different
yeah.
podcast episode of its own. But I think it's exactly that. It's exactly that. And yes, with some immigrants here, for a lot of immigrants here, it looks different. Uh, but then there are a lot of communities in North America too that for whom the reality is not quite the same, be it indigenous communities, other racialized communities. So I think the more and more I spend time here, and the more we move forward in time, I think there is greater sensitivity to this matter, and there's greater recognition of the matter. So I think as South Asians, we get away with being the model minority in a
Yeah.
lot of senses, and the privileges that come with that, even in a place like this, which is not to disregard any of the struggles that our ancestors went through when they came here, because they were very real. They still are very real, but it's all about context and perspective of how other communities living in the same space see it, uh, and how their experiences line up with ours. But it's still true. I mean, I'm here. I'm still here for the same reasons that me being here and being exposed to the resources and opportunities that I would be exposed to here in some way or the other enable me to serve my country more in a more compelling fashion than I could have by just staying there. Just mere physical presence is not enough, even in Canada or any place in the world. So I don't think there's anything wrong with expanding your horizons, gaining more perspective, and the right skills and capabilities that will enable you to serve your country and your people and your communities, however you define those to be, in the best possible manner.
Yeah, thank you for giving your perspective, because a lot of I have a that's one thing I was gonna say previously, is that coming to U of T, there's it's very diverse in many areas, but one thing I found really interesting in my program, it's very highly concentrated with international students. I can't remember what percentage, but it's quite high in our program. And I can't tell you how many people I've met that didn't grow up here, come here just for school. And yeah, it's just amazing to learn, because we learn so much about people's perspectives in our own community here, in my experiences. But that's the perspective of Canadian X, right? Ex Canadian
Mm, yeah.
growing up here. But different parts of the world have very different societies,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very interesting to learn. Like so many people, I've met so many people from, China, India, different parts of India, different parts of China as well, and just Southeast Asia, Europe, Middle East, just everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just amazing. One thing U of T has definitely allowed me to do is like broaden my perspective on the world
Mm-hmm.
through the experience of other people
Yeah.
from those countries and societies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. That's exactly my thoughts.
yeah, and it's just U of T is in the perspective of people here in Ontario. It's kind of like it's got a reputation for being a difficult school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, they call it. I mean, we have an Instagram account called U of Tears, so I mean, I could tell you about the struggles of the U of T
Uh-huh.
student, but
Mm-hmm.
or it's like you can't get A's at U of T or whatever. All these things are said by people um, outside of the school, but you know, um, I really enjoyed my time here so far. I mean, even though it was during a pandemic, the first year was completely online. I was still able to make, friendships. I was able to meet you,
Yeah.
and just you could, even if against the odds, you can still learn about people, make connections with people, um, build relationships, and I'm glad U of T, has given me the opportunity to do that. Um, and you know, despite what everyone says about the U of T community, how it's all about grinding, and in some aspect, it definitely is about striving for doing well in academics and all that. But it's also about the community here, and that's one thing I really like about U
Mm-hmm.
of T.
Yeah.
Versus, I mean, growing up in Ontario, you hear about all these other universities. The most internationally recognized university that's in Canada is U of T.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't want I'm not trying to brag. It's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't really matter to me, right? I don't
Mm-hmm.
really care how recognized the university is. Um, but here there's a lot of other schools have cultures of I don't know. I mean, people always talk about, for example, Queens. People, a lot of people talk bad about Queens and say it's kind of a very stuck up culture. I mean, I had a friend I have a friend who has a friend there, and they're talking about some guy came in his on the first day came in a helicopter or something ridiculous like that, but I'm glad I haven't experienced that kind of culture because that's one thing that just makes like I can't stand is just that uppity flex your money kind of culture within any institution like I was lucky enough not to experience too much of that, and then I'm glad I don't experience that here at U of T, and I try not to be that person as much as I can,
Mm-hmm.
and just really down to earth people. I guess it's an advertisement for you to come to U of T to continue your post secondary studies.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's just obviously it's anecdotal, but every person I've met has been pretty down to earth, despite it being a relatively prestigious school to go to in
Mm-hmm.
Canada. So yeah.
Yeah. All I'll say is that you attract the energy that you emanate yourself. And the great thing about being in a place as large as U of T is you will find people with all kinds of energy. Just
Mm-hmm.
so it's less so a question about who you have, who is out there, more so a question of who you want to be. And the
Yeah.
moment you unabashedly be that is when you will attract the people who resonate with that, who you will resonate with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere. I can only speak to U of T because I have only been at U of T.
Yeah.
But to me, that doesn't matter because you will find your people everywhere, regardless.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to for that to be at U of T, and I couldn't imagine myself anywhere else. But the universe got me here, got you here, and wherever the universe takes you, there, till the time you continue to live by the principles and values that you want to live life by, then you will attract the right people.
Yeah, that's something that we should, I should definitely try and remember. Um,
Mhm.
you know, in going from, I grew up in, growing up in Brampton, mostly South Asian community, then moving to Mississauga for high school in a much different area. I learned about many different perspectives, right? Like, everyone had this very similar experience. I mean, we didn't have the same, but, we're all the same, mostly of the same cultural background in Brampton. And, you know, I moved to Southern Mississauga, and this area I'm in right now is there's a lot more white folks and you know Arab people and just a lot different people that I never grew up with, right? And then it was very interesting to learn that perspective going to that school. It was it's kind of funny, like there's always a thing like the token brown guy in something or the token black guy or token Asian East Asian guy, but at our school it was the token white guy. And it kind of reversed when I came to this school. Not that it was just only white people, which is no, it doesn't really matter who's there. It's about the content of the people that are there. But
Mhm.
it was interesting to see, just to see how other people think, and their lives, and you know, um, people. I feel like places that people kind of rag on Brampton a lot. Um, I find the jokes. I can joke about almost anything, so I appreciate the jokes because I grew up with a lot of those kind of people that they joke about. But it's one of those things where it's kind of a big topic, but being surrounded with the same people all the time. I think
Mhm.
the term ethnic ghetto, um, being surrounded by the same people all the time, kind of it has its benefits, right? But it also has its drawbacks, um, because you just a lot of times you're just having the same perspective. It's a feedback loop almost, right? It's echo chamber. You hear the same ideas, same problems, and I mean you see a lot of the problems emerge. I mean, there's a reason right now Brampton. It's we left before it got worse, crime there, and it's you know, too much of one thing is bad, right? Too much of anything, any one thing. And then I'm glad that I was able to experience that other people, because different perspectives create conversation, create discussion, and and it's something that I'm very grateful for that I've been able to experience. And on that note, guys, that concludes this week's episode of the Way Podcast with Atharv. Atharv, thank you for coming. And if you'd like to, plug whatever projects you're working on, you can go ahead.
Well, uh, I call this a Zoom bingo, where every time somebody speaks and they're on mute, or somebody speaks and they're frozen, all these things, I call it the Zoom bingo. So there we go. One for the Zoom
Yeah.
bingo. Thank you so much again for having me. This has been such a fantastic conversation, very insightful, very engaging. And it was a pleasure to learn about, well, talk to you after such a long time, after having met only once, funnily enough. That's what I love about the way connections work
Mhm.
in the world and at U of T, to learn about your story and your family story, and your learnings from sport, music, and everything beyond. It's a wonderful initiative, and I commend you for starting it. As we were saying, starting is usually the hardest thing. As for what I've been working on with Different Boat Same Storm, we are just working on a new season now, trying to do something different because the world around us looks very different now since when we started it. So stay tuned. We can follow us on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our work on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast from. We are looking forward to doing some releasing and sharing more about what we're up to very, very soon. But until then, there's 25 episodes of the work that we've done so far that Sijin talked about. Do dive in, to tell us how you feel, to tell us what you want. But that said, do check out The Way as well. This seems like a really exciting
Yeah.
project with many, many insightful conversations. And this is only one of the many.
And on that note, guys, that ends this week's episode. You can check us out at on Instagram at the.waypodcast, and you can check our website out for a blog post. It should be in the bio link. So yeah, make sure to check that out. Check us out on YouTube and Spotify. Save us to your playlist. Give us a like, comment on our videos, and send us a message on what you want to hear next. Who do you want to have on next? All right, guys. Thank you for watching.